Good morning, everybody. We're live for the NFL Week 11 live stream preview here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. Good to have everybody back for another week. In this show, I will talk about every game, every side, every total, and tell you everything that I think is important about betting NFL Week 11 coming up, and hopefully give you something to think about in order to help make your bets. Live chat is active so far this morning. Good to see it. Lots of commentary. Want to just say hello to everybody before we jump in. It's going to be a bit of a different live stream. Still following the same format, but we have a bit of a inserted question that came over from the podcast every single morning here on YouTube. I think has been really good. And so I'm going to get to that question first, and then we'll dive in. Just want to say hello to Josh Fowler, who says, we've got some life in the Panthers win total. Yes, we do. It is a little bit. You're right, but it is life. Having 2 wins in a row, they go into the bye. They're going to get Thielen back. They're going to get Wanham back. Brooks is going to be on the field. See if they can make it 3 in a row coming out of the bye. Rich says, good morning, Adam. I feel a good week of picks coming. Me too. Some good opportunities on Sunday. Great comment here from David Rosansky. Big showdown in Buffalo on Sunday. You should be here for some wings at Bar Bill. I tell you, playoffs last year, stopping their pregame, the honey Cajun butter wings, as good as it gets. I tried to replicate the sauce last postseason after coming home. I spent like 2 weeks trying to get the sauce right. I could never quite get it. Man, you want to talk about like bite for bite wing enjoyment? It's as good as it gets right there at Bar Bill with those honey Cajun butter wings. Good morning, everybody, except Shane Waldron from Jay Nava. That's a bit harsh. Guy's out of a job, but deservingly so, perhaps, after the lackluster performance so far. Riley Carroll got his moose. Saw the pictures over the weekend. He's going to save some jerky for me, perhaps. Let's have a good week. I hope so as well. Changing 500 with a good question. Devin Barth, Nino back in for the live chat as well. Ryan Roberts says Richardson is back. We'll talk about that as well. Some changes coming up. That game's at the bottom of the rotation, so we'll talk about those. Bisaya says, what's your opinion on teasing big favorites across keys? We'll talk about that in a bit when we get to some teasers. RJ Jets Pete, good morning as well. Lots of folks back in for a live chat, including Bryce Miller as well, who says best of luck. Good to see everybody back and commenting. To Changing 500 and Bisaya, hopefully I get that right. Get your questions in a little bit later. We'll get to them as we go. I'll happily answer the teaser questions, happily answer the coach bump questions as well when we get to those games a little bit later, the Raiders specifically, and we'll talk about those. So anyone that you have specifically, we'll answer them as we go, and then we'll get to those in line. Starting off with a question over from the podcast. Was asked for playoff predictions. I thought it was a good question, not something that I typically talk about, but with the audience that YouTube is reaching, some great questions have been coming in every morning on the podcast as I've been posting it there every season. Show airs at 5 a.m. Pacific, 5 a.m. Eastern, 2 a.m. Pacific, and a great viewer has been asking questions all season. He drops this one in. Let's get some playoff predictions. Never talk about it, which is true. And so I just want to give the rundown as it stands right now this morning, looking forward, as I would see the AFC from 1 to 7. Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, Houston, Chargers, Bengals, Steelers is how I would have 1 to 7 shaping out. Looking forward to the end of the season. In the NFC, Detroit, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Atlanta, Green Bay, Washington, Minnesota. And that is the layout that I would have for 1 to 7. Now, in the NFC, I was very much looking for a path for Seattle. They do have the game against Minnesota late in the season, but the Seahawks schedule compared to the Vikings remainder of schedule, I see that as tough to make up some ground. I really would like to see a path for Seattle with some of the tweaks that they're making. We'll talk about that in the San Francisco matchup. Was hoping that could potentially line up, but it's looking pretty grim down the stretch for the Seahawks schedule-wise. So it would take a lot to make up that deficit. Was really trying to look for a path there for them to get into the 7 seed. I do think we've seen Minnesota hit their ceiling, and they're coming back a little bit. I can't really, if I'm just kind of judging the NFC and pointing to a team that I think very noisy, perhaps overrated to an extent, not getting there all the way. It's Washington. We talked about last week, and we bet the Steelers against them. Great offense, has performed well, but again, it's the rookie QB. It's the coordinator and play caller that always trends down towards the end of the season. It's a defense that's been so soft and just doesn't have a lot of personnel. But even that, with such the deficit between them and Seattle at the moment, it's hard to see them falling out of the playoffs as well. So I I just can't see a path in there for Seattle, unfortunately. Would love to kind of have them as the underrated team that could potentially make the push late season, but it just looks like the deficit is a little bit too large at the moment. So again, KC, Buffalo, Baltimore, Houston, Chargers, Bengals, Steelers in the AFC, Detroit, Philly, San Francisco, Atlanta, Green Bay, Washington, Minnesota in the NFC. And Preston says the Seahawks will knock off the Vikings in December. I agree. Got to make up a 3-game deficit in this. You look at the schedules and how it plays out for both teams. That is tough, just to see where those wins are coming from. But I agree with you. Like, I'm looking forward to that game, and you're looking at some of the aggregates and what some of the prices might be. I'm with you. I'm with you, Preston. I am with you. Okay. That was a good question that came in. If you guys have questions as we go, drop them in the live chat. We'll keep this more Q&A as we go from week 11 onward. I know the first chunk of the season was very game-focused, very matchup-focused. Want to keep the Q&A balanced, so do keep the questions coming in. I appreciate them as always. Starts off Thursday Night Football, does week 11, with the Washington Commanders on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. 3.5 for the Eagles total in this game, 49. There are some 48.5 showing as there was a little bit of under money that came into the market. I don't have a play on the side nor the total in this game. I will say one thing that stands out to me a little bit is just how the Eagles have not been pushed by an opposing offense for several weeks in a row now. They have been playing from ahead. They have been front running. They have been relying on the run game. They have been really shutting down games. I'm not taking anything away from the Jalen Hurts performance yet, but this is an Eagles team that we just haven't seen playing from that deficit and needing to get more aggressive and needing to push the ball downfield. Is this the spot where that happens? Could certainly be so, but I have a hard time seeing where Washington comes in, is able to stop the run, is able to get stops early, is able to get Philadelphia off of the field. I think the Eagles, again, are able to move it early and move it often, and then you have the Commanders playing a bit of catch-up in their own right. I would love it if it was flipped if I'm looking at the over at this high total. But again, I just have a little bit of difficulty there. There is a first-time Thursday night game element applying to this when you consider the coaching staff for Washington playing in this role, although it is an experienced coaching staff that has been there and done that in previous roles. But as we've seen over the course of the season, even with Houston against the New York Jets, a somewhat experienced coaching staff more than the season in, looked like that Thursday night prep was a bit of a struggle for them too. And so that's a note to consider when you're looking at this game as well. Could see, again, like if you put me on the spot, I kind of have my eye intrigued by that over as this total starts to creep down a little bit, but not something that I have bet on the side nor the total in this spot yet. Get to Green Bay on the road at Chicago. I think a much more interesting game to talk about when you consider that the price point here at 6 for Green Bay is very high, probably a bit of a premium, definitely some inflation on this number. And the big question becomes when you're handicapping this game, what in the world are you going to get from Chicago? If you're looking at this game and you say Chicago gives you 100% effort and it's the rivalry game, it's effectively the season on the line given how strong the NFC North is, and you're getting the effort game from Chicago and it's a bounce back. Well, you're looking at 6. I would have a hard time saying that that's not a very bettable number. The problem that comes with this is just everything that's going on internally for Chicago. So in this spot, you get the new play caller bump. You should anyway. But the question is the offense there to respond to it? And is it really a bump? On one hand, you look at Thomas Brown coming in as the new offensive coordinator for the Bears, and you're excited about it because there are those ties back to LA and working with Sean McVay. And the Bears having 3 strong wide receivers, you think 11 personnel, that makes a lot of sense for how this could work. Putting cold water on that, similar situation last year in Carolina with the personnel. I'm not going to compare the personnel of the Panthers last year to what the Bears have this year. The Bears are at a higher level. Thomas Brown very much underwhelmed in his very short time as a replacement play caller for Carolina last season. And so this is not like first-time guy getting inserted in. It's new. It's different. It's going to uplift everything. Kind of seen it in a somewhat comparable spot last year. It didn't go well for Brown, and it wasn't a big change for the Panthers. And even though they did get to cover as an underdog in that first game when he took over, it wasn't a long-term sustained change. And I just wonder now, with everything else going on in Chicago, there are now allegedly calls for Caleb Williams to be benched at quarterback coming from veterans. Speculation is perhaps that's coming from DJ Moore, one of those key 3 wide receivers. There are offensive line injuries that are now coupled this morning with the release of Davis, who they signed last year. And so in a myriad of offensive line injuries, you have a backup that you signed for big money. Now you let him walk this morning, which is causing even more question marks on offense. You have a defense that is 2 weeks removed from a key piece of the secondary walking off the practice field, getting benched, and the defense no-showing against Arizona. You have an offensive line last week with makeup pieces that allowed 9 sacks, and we've all seen the video of Caleb Williams not getting picked up by anybody on the offensive line. It was a Patriots player that had to help him up once he was sacked and left on the ground. In this spot, it's the Green Bay Packers coming out of the bye, where very likely Jordan Love is a little bit healthier. It's not a severe weather game, but there is going to be an element of wind. There's a very low chance of precipitation, and the Packers arguably a little bit deflated in their offensive production, not only from the QB injuries season long, but because they've played in a handful of weather games leading into this game as well. A lot going on here and a lot of negatives for Chicago. You look at the price and you say, if this is a game where the team is fully quit on Eberflus and it's the coach that's the problem, and potentially now the QB that's the problem, you can look at this and say, look, 6 might be a bit of a short number, but on the chance that you get any level of effort here from Chicago, 6 certainly at a very, very steep premium. And so tough for me to handicap this and get comfortable with it. I can look at the price and say it's high, but there's just a list of negatives here that is beyond just speculation and kind of grounded in a bit of truth here about the issues going on behind the scenes for Chicago. Ryan Roberts asks, does the new coach bump count for coordinators? It certainly does. It's at a lesser extent, but absolutely, especially for offenses like Chicago who have been failing. But again, kind of becomes a bit of a tough handicap. Sean says, think you have to take the Bears and hold your nose. If you believe that you're getting any amount of effort out of this Bears team and that level of quit that we've seen now for 3 weeks comes down with the changes, I agree with you. If it's anything else, you're looking at wide open here for the Packers as the floor might be falling out. Ron Mexico, Green Bay minus 148 money line on the look ahead. Great bet if you're able to get it. Couple more questions on this one coming in. We're seeing Tommy Adler with even a 35% chance that Chicago has quit. How does that not create enormous value on a line that is only slightly inflated, assuming a full strength effort from each team? That's the handicap, Tommy. If you can figure that out, I think you have a pretty strong opinion on the side. Donnie, what's the DJ Moore issue with Caleb? So there's been a couple different reports. The first came out from an aggregate account that not a lot of people put a lot of trust in, given the changes of ownership of that account over the last year or so. And so that initial report came off of other speculation that there were veterans in the Bears locker room who were calling for Caleb Williams to be benched. That then sent a spiral of other reporters around the team searching for, is this true? Is this not? Another couple of reporters who were not like main trusted sources for the Bears picked it up, tweeted about it, wrote articles about it. And the speculation was that he was among those vets that was calling for the benching of Williams. It's a bit TMZ-ish at the moment, I would say is a fair way to describe it. But that's been the case for a couple of other situations around the Bears for the last couple of weeks, and they've all come true. So there is some reason to believe it, in my opinion. Cleveland on the road at the New Orleans Saints. Saints -1 total in this game, 44.5. Numbers come in. We talked about it Sunday night at 3. It is now 1. I still like the Browns here +1. When we're looking at the total of 44.5, this is a wait and see. And when I talk about the pinned comment down in the comment sections that goes over the course of the week where I update thoughts and any ads for bets, I'm certainly waiting to see if this comes back to the key of 44. And I could very much be intrigued by the over in this game. At 44.5, it's a wait and see. Check back on the pinned thread in the comment to see if it is an ad later in the week. Let's talk about just this matchup. First and foremost, the Saints had the new coach bump, as we talked about with Darren Rizzi last week. Part of the reason why we like them here on the show, plus 3.5 against the Atlanta Falcons. They win, they cover. Rizzi's celebrating. Everything's happy in Saints world for at least a week. The Dennis Allen experience is gone. Here's the problem. You dive into that box score. It was very, very, very misleading for the Saints and the victory that they came away with. They were outgained by a significant amount, more than 15% differential in net success rate. It was very one-sided in terms of Atlanta moving the football consistently on the Saints and New Orleans being hoisted up by a couple explosive plays hit by Derek Carr and a ton of mistakes made by the Atlanta Falcons in the kicking game and otherwise. And so a very misleading win. Those things tend to happen when you get the new coach bump and you get the new effort lifted up because of that motivation for the new coach. What I don't buy into is that being something that is sustained going forward. I didn't see the Saints defense, which has been the big issue, look that much different. Was there a little bit more speed, a little bit more effort? Sure. This team still has a lot of issues on defense, specifically defending the run, which has been a problem all season. Nothing that I saw Rizzi do to change that stood out to me against the Atlanta Falcons. When I think about what the Cleveland Browns with Dorsey as their play caller want to do at their core, it's run the football. And there's more positives here with that. The Browns offensive line, healthy across the board, whether it's Jones or Willis at left tackle with the business decision and the benching. We'll see. I don't know if that's that big of a factor. The point is you got 5 healthy guys up front. You have Nick Chubb in the backfield, who's going to be at 100% coming out of the bye, getting the full workload. Positives for the Browns, a big matchup advantage for them in this spot for what they want to do. I think it lines up very well for them to move the football against the Saints in this game, who just had a major misleading box score work in their favor last week. And I'm just surprised to see this game adjusted up slightly. Now we're at the level where it was on the look ahead, but even so, I don't agree with the Saints holding steady at this price point. Now, when we're talking about the over, we'll see if this comes back down. There's a real argument to be made that the Browns offense is very much suppressed due to how things have gone this season. When you look at season-long numbers, a lot of that's influenced by Watson. You now insert Jameis. You get more aggression, for better or for worse. You now have Chubb back and healthy. You have the new play caller. You have the O-line healthy. This is an offense that could be a couple of points higher on their individual total ranking if we're looking down the road 2 to 3 weeks from now. For the Saints in this spot, it is a negative that Derek Carr's not going to get the clean pocket. But what I did notice was the Browns defense so far this season, 6th best when defending 2 tight end sets of any team in the NFL. However, Cleveland now has JOK, their best linebacker, on IR. And we're also looking at Hicks dealing with an injury. He's been above average in terms of grading at PFF for the course of the season. So if the linebacker group for Cleveland is a little bit banged up, the Saints have basically abandoned 3 wide receiver sets with their injuries. So even if Carr is going to suffer comparatively to last week where he had clean pockets and wasn't sacked all game, you put him in an environment here where he's playing from heavier personnel against a team that's banged up at linebacker. That rating and defense for the Browns specifically against this personnel grouping probably takes a big hit when you consider the personnel lost and you think about Kamara and other pieces with Hill on this offense and how they can attack linebackers. I think that's a positive for the Saints offense. And so let's keep an eye on this. Again, I'll keep everybody updated in the pinned post below. But for now, it's just the Browns, and we'll see what happens with the total a little bit later in the week. A couple comments coming in that we'll jump into. Birdie says they needed that coaching change. Saints are the look. I don't agree with the Saints being the look, but I agree that they needed the coaching change for sure. Tommy says Saints lost 7 straight before misleading emotional win last week. That's a good kind of context to put it into. Gerard Morris says, good morning, Adam, and everybody. Go Hawks. Big Seahawks fan. Big game for you on deck that we'll talk about in a little bit. Recreational player says, TMZ-ish ain't in the dictionary. Is it ain't in the dictionary? I don't know about that one. But yeah, you're probably right that it's not. Maybe it should be. But that's a very modern reference for me to pull off of the cuff out of nowhere. LA Rams -5 with a total of 44 on the road at New England. The Patriots benefited in a big way from the Bears quit scenario last week. They win 19-3. Everybody's happy about it. It wasn't an amazing performance by any stretch. And I wonder, as we look at this on a number that's very stable from where it was on the look aheads, and we haven't seen much movement. If anything, the Pats have taken a little bit of money in here. Are we perhaps forgetting how bad the Patriots have been the entire season? And I think about this coaching staff and this play caller and this defense against Sean McVay and this Rams offense. To me, it looks like a big mismatch. Now, it's priced correctly. I don't have a play on the side or the total. I'm surprised to see it hold. And I do think this has more to do with the Rams' performance on Monday night against the Dolphins than it does, I guess, in tandem a little bit with the Patriots' performance last week and what's coming from that. So I think we see the Rams offense show a lot better than what they did against the Dolphins. There were a lot of points that were kind of left hidden in that game against the Dolphins. You think about the second half, which stayed under, that didn't feature an entire punt the entire second half. Kind of a misleading game, a bit of a misleading total, a bit of a misleading offensive performance for the Rams, specifically in the second half with the field goal decisions and how that played out. And then again, the Patriots, they get 9 sacks against the Bears. That's not an effort they're replicating. It's not something they've been able to produce earlier in the season. The pass rush has been a bit of an issue all year. That was so much a product of that Bears offensive line in shambles and Caleb Williams holding on to the ball and everything going on with the Bears, rather than it was, in my opinion, the Pats on an uptick of performance. The Rams, somewhat quietly, just because of that performance, got back guys on the offensive line very late. Those guys are going to have a semi-full week of practice. It's a shortened week for LA with the travel. But I would expect the Rams offensive line to look a lot better than it did against the Dolphins, whose pass rush I thought was a big surprise in that Monday game. Although it got us there with the Dolphins, that was as good of a defensive effort from the Dolphins as we have seen before. So the Rams are kind of in this spot here in this game where you kind of have outlier performances in not only what they played, but not only what the Pats played. And I wonder how that's going to impact this number between now and Sunday and what we might be looking at. And so again, in terms of games that may be updated in the pinned comment thread, this could certainly be one of them down below. Baltimore -3 with a total of 48 on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. I like Baltimore here at -3. And we were on the Pittsburgh Steelers last week. It worked for us, as we mentioned at the top of the show, against the Washington Commanders. And we were talking about that breakdown about how the Steelers defense versus the Commanders offense, what was more noisy, which unit was going to win. And we saw the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, the more veteran unit led by Mike Tomlin, really buy in and put forth a great effort to hold Jaden Daniels and the Commanders to their worst game of the season. The big talking point about this game that I'm seeing everywhere, and perhaps rightfully so, is Lamar struggles against the Pittsburgh Steelers. 1-3 all-time against the Steelers. We see his numbers drop off. What I start to question in this matchup, just beyond this number being short for how great the Ravens have been at -3, is how much of what the Steelers did last week defensively to contain Jaden Daniels and to slow down a mobile quarterback is not something that can be reproduced again this week against the Ravens, who have extra time to prepare and obviously were aware and watching what was going on with that Steelers defensive effort. Something that the Steelers did very well was utilize the blitz at key times against the Washington Commanders, something the Ravens and Lamar specifically have become way better at attacking this year are these same blitzes. For a long time, it's been a big issue for Lamar operating in this offense when he has been influenced by the blitz. Now they have answers to that with Todd Monken leading the way. And now the Ravens have more weapons in the backfield with all 3 running backs healthy. This, to me, looks like a spot where I think the Ravens have more answers than the Steelers do defensively. Alex Highsmith being out is a negative for the Steelers at the linebacker position against these backs. There is a negative for Baltimore here with Kyle Hamilton's status in doubt for this game, dealing with the injury. If he's back, that would be another positive for the Steelers. But I think this spot for the Ravens specifically sets up quite well for them. And I think -3 here when you're looking at some of the aggregates, when you're looking at some of the market ratings, which would make this closer to 4, you're looking at kind of a bit of a premium here put on the Steelers for their recent run. And I think this matchup sets up decently well here for the Ravens to come out and show it. The last thing that I would say about the Steelers that gives me a little bit of doubt about them going forward, since Russell Wilson took over, when you sort the league since week 7 in EPA per play on 3rd and 4th down, the Steelers are gaining 0.4 expected points per play. That is the second best mark in the league. When you sort the league overall by EPA per play since Russ took over, the Pittsburgh Steelers are 8th in EPA per play. They are 26th in success rate. When you're looking at EPA versus success rate and you see a big discrepancy between EPA and success rate, that typically means very boom or bust offense, not a lot of sustained offense. And from the Pittsburgh Steelers, I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing. It represents the team to a T since they took over with Russell Wilson. And typically what we see is the gap between those two narrow, and the explosive plays are not something that pulls that success rate up. It's typically the down-to-down success as a whole that pulls the EPA down. And so if this is a game where things kind of meet their level, that could be a bit of a turning point for the Steelers offense, which has been very beneficial from big plays. A little bit of a caveat to that would be that the Ravens have surrendered a lot of big plays uncharacteristically as well. So a lot of variance in that regard, but that to me is kind of a key indicator that the Steelers offense kind of overperforming so far since Russ took over. Could be a game where we see that turn around. Las Vegas on the road at the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins laying 8 with a total of 44. Scott Turner is in as the offensive play caller for the Las Vegas Raiders. That could potentially lead to a bump, as we're talking about. Similar scenario with Thomas Brown taking over for the Chicago Bears. Interesting how Waldron and Getsy, both tied back to the Bears, are the 2 first OCs who were let go this season. What a franchise. I'm happy for the Bears. They're taking some of the spotlight off of my Jets. So I appreciate all the effort that they've been putting forth. The change that you're going to see for Las Vegas, unfortunately for Raiders fans, is a big dedication to the running game. And that's something that Antonio Pierce has wanted all season. It's something that Antonio Pierce has not been able to get out of this offense all season. I don't know what's going to change in this game specifically. And although the bye, in my opinion, would set up for a better spot for a coordinator bump than what you would see from the Bears, who announced it Tuesday and made the change in week, the Raiders just can't run the football right now. When you look at it, they should be able to, with an offensive line that's somewhat underrated. There's not a lot of run success at all for this team. And the Dolphins, quietly, as their defense has struggled kind of all season and played to a level that is below expectation. One spot that they've been quite consistent at is defending the run. This is also a spot where the Raiders are on the road getting 8 points in Miami. Are they going to be in the position where they can really push the running game? We still haven't seen the announcement for who is going to start at quarterback officially for the Raiders. That probably comes later today. I don't think it makes a huge difference in terms of what we're going to see from a point spread impact. I don't like a lot of things that I'm hearing out of the locker room and the changes made for the Raiders in this spot. Now, the Dolphins at 8, we saw a big effort game for them against the Rams. It was a defense they matched up very well against. I'm worried what we're seeing from Hill a little bit. He's playing through the injury. He very likely has to have surgery at some point by the way that the reports are coming out. He's very much a bit of a decoy at this point compared to a big impact player. Perhaps that changes here against the Raiders. Something the Raiders have been decent against this season is preventing some of those big explosive plays. Miami's offense has become very much condensed with the short, quick pass. So they're kind of equipped to throw against this, but we might see the Raiders take that bend but don't break mentality to an even higher level in this spot. A lot of questions with this game. I look at the side and the total. I think it's priced right. I don't have much of an opinion on this one. I think it's a spot where just move on and keep an eye on this as the week goes on and see what we get from the QB announcement, see what we get if anything changes. But right now, just not a lot for me on this game side nor total. Gary says that Vegas is a disaster, and I tend to agree with that. Like, you wonder, effort-wise, Pierce has been very good at getting a lot out of his team. Does that elevate in this game? Is this a team that starts to trend downward as the playoffs become further out of reach and it tends to get closer to the end of the line for Pierce? Don't know what to make of it. Birdie says you would have to think that Norv Turner run scheme should get that Raider run game going again. Interested to see the blocking schemes that were able to get Cook multiple 1,000-yard seasons. Again, like, it's all there for the Raiders to get the run game going. All the pieces are there. Running back quality, perhaps a little bit less or so or more so of a question. You would look at the O-line and some of the pieces on paper, and you would think that it could be there. It just hasn't all season. And it's not been for a lack of effort or a lack of touches being given to guys. We'll see. But nothing for me on that one. Jacksonville on the road at the Detroit Lions. So if you listen to VSiN, if you listen to the podcast, you know I like the Lions. This game is now at 14. Earlier in the week, was talking about it at 12.5 and 13. This number moved this morning on the announcement that Mac Jones would be starting. That, to me, was a bit of a surprise, and maybe I was lost somewhere. When Trevor Lawrence was announced injured last week, everything that I saw about that and how it was reported, I thought it was season-ending or had a very good chance of IR. I never expected him to play in this game, but on the news this morning, this moved up further. And so it's not that I don't agree with it moving up. I'm just surprised to see that caused it, because I was under pretty well certainty that Mac Jones would be starting in this game. And now we have it. We saw the line bump up. And so at 14, I'm certainly still leaning that way of the Lions. Not a massive difference from 13.5, but we are to a somewhat of a key number here at 14, given obviously the touchdown margin. Now, what I will say in this game specifically is I'm just looking at the spot here for Jacksonville. If there is a game where Peterson and company are going to be fired, it would be following this matchup, because the Jags are on the bye next week. And so typically what we see from teams and ownership when they make changes, it happens right after the game before the bye. So it's a extra week of time to get acclimated for the interim head coach and any changes that are being made. When I look at the Detroit Lions, this is a coaching staff that is getting up for it every single week. In the Campbell tenure, in years past, when they've had to lay bigger numbers and they've been in spots like this, it's typically been an underwhelming performance. This season, it's been anything but. And that Bucks game was quite an outlier when you consider how well the Lions were moving the football over the course of the game. They just couldn't get the ball in the end zone inside the 10-yard line. That could have looked a lot different than 2016. But this is a Lions staff and a Lions level of effort that is in a different world than what we're getting from the Jags right now on a weekly basis. And what we saw from Mac Jones, that those running back targets, it's not working here against the Lions as a sustainable course of offense. And we mentioned misleading box scores. Last week, the Vikings win 12-7. That was very much about what Darnold wasn't able to do in the red zone, 0 for 5 over 5 trips. That could have been a 28, 35-point game for the Vikings offense if they're just converting on those red zone drives. A lot of noise in that final score that made the Jags look a lot better getting the cover against the Vikings in that spot. And so where I'm going with all of this is, you think about the Lions, if they get out running, which they should definitely be able to against this man coverage front for the Jags, and they build up a lead, and it gets into the second half, and the Jags have Brian Thomas less than 100%. You've got offensive linemen banged up. You have Mac Jones, who's not the answer for anything out of the pocket. And maybe it's a 2-score deficit into the second half, and Peterson knows this very well could be the end. What's the effort like in the second half from the Jags? The Lions aren't taking their foot off the gas. Do you see the Jags with Jones under center just kind of pack it in effectively in the second half, knowing what could very well be coming. That's speculation on my part, obviously. I don't have a tie to the Jags locker room that says this is in fact going to happen. It's looking at how things have progressed during the course of the season and just saying if there's going to be a spot where it happens, teams in the past have handled it with it being this spot. So when it comes to looking at this number, typically it's like this is a big number, hard to justify, misleading box score last week, right? A lot of things tie into it. The Lions off of back-to-back emotional road game wins. If there's a spot for a Lions letdown, this could be it. But what I'm saying is, as a counterpoint, this could be the end of the line for the Jags, and we see second half with a let-off. And again, we see comments coming in the chat. Lions can't possibly be anywhere near max motivated for this game. They're dominant when they're playing from ahead. And on the contrary to what we're just talking about with the Jags coaching staff, this is a Lions staff. This is their last year together. Johnson's going to be a head coach. Glenn is going to be a head coach. It was a miracle that they held everybody together this year for another season. I get the impression that this team obviously knows that internally, and they're just going 100% all in every game with some of these game plans. I mean, even against the Cowboys, I know there's revenge involved. They're up 6 touchdowns, and they're reporting O-linemen as eligible and throwing trick plays and trying to run up the score. This run game and the O-line is dominant. So even when they're forced to go conservative, they're still scoring, and they're still putting up margin. And it's not like there's a daunting game on deck for the Lions. They play the Colts next week on Sunday. So it's not like it's a short week division game on deck or they have a massive game coming up. It's an out-of-conference game next week that isn't really forcing that traditional sandwich spot either. So I don't think this is a spot where we see the Lions pull up, even if they are leading. Sean mentions the Lions are best team in the league when playing from ahead. They set up very well, for sure. Gerard says they have the Colts on deck. I agree with you. Rudy says Jags are a beaten down man. That's a graphic way to put it, but you're right. Minnesota -6 with a total of 40 on the road at the Tennessee Titans. I like the Titans in this game getting 6 points. As mentioned at the top when we were going through the playoff breakdown, I think we've seen the Vikings hit their ceiling. Back-to-back weeks for Darnold against weaker defenses. Just hasn't looked like what it did early in the season. Vikings came out red hot. We all know it. It's a well-coached team. It's a great head coach. It's a great play caller. It's a great defense. It's a great defensive coordinator. It's a great team. We're getting to the point now where, again, for a second week in a row, it's a big number on the road, and I think there is some question at quarterback. I look at this number. There's certainly a premium being put here on Minnesota, as a lot of the market ratings would make this 7 or higher. A lot of the aggregate ratings have it at that point too. And that's on a neutral field. And so you're really not giving Tennessee much respect for the home game, for the spot for Minnesota. If you're getting to basically 7 on a neutral, I do think that this is starting to be priced too long here for Tennessee relative to what it should be. The Titans offense with Levis last week did have some hidden points against the Chargers that perhaps made them look a little bit worse than they should be. Defensively for Tennessee, it's been solid all season long, especially up against the run. If Aaron Jones for the Vikings, a little bit banged up and less than 100%, I think that's a Titans defense that can win up front. We also have seen the Titans at home be able to generate a little bit more pressure than they have in other spots. So this could be another game where we see Darnold just not play to that ceiling that was established earlier in the season that the Vikings are still being priced at. And in this spot, I think the Titans are a bit of an intriguing home underdog here, getting 6 points. And so not much more to it than that. Just think it's a number that is a little bit too long for the Vikings to be laying. I like the Titans here getting the 6. Afternoon games, Seattle on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. Niners a 6.5-point favorite with a total of 48. I like the Seahawks here as a dog getting 6.5 points. Somewhere in the chat, Gerard is celebrating. We're in it together this week, Gerard. All-in effort coming for the Seattle Seahawks. We see basically the clean adjustment for the venue flip from where this game closed in the first meeting with San Francisco, with a slight premium added for the 49ers home field. This is a Seahawks game, as I mentioned, all-in effort that you're getting. And I think we see the defense, which is now healthy and still making changes out of the bye, give their best defensive effort of the season. That game against the Rams was one where the multiple red zone turnovers, the overtime turnover as well, took away what should have been a victory for the Seahawks. So I think has them coming in looking in a bit of a different light. I think the changes in the bye from McDonald are going to work out, as well as some of the changes that he made during his time with the Ravens. He was focusing on the linebacker position in Baltimore, and we saw those defenses trend up at the end of the year. I think we see that in this spot. Not only did he make the trade at the position, but the surprise news and the bit of a wake-up call was seeing Dodson cut yesterday. The team's leading tackler through Week 10 was let go yesterday. That's a pretty big signal to the defense of not only everyone's job is on the line, but, hey, changes are being made. And I think you see that effort and that buy-in from the Seahawks in this spot. I think what's telling to an extent is the 49ers, even with everybody back against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, perhaps deserved a little bit better on the scoreboard, but it wasn't that dominant runaway performance that was really expected and anticipated. And we haven't seen a massive adjustment up, and nobody's wanted this 6.5 yet in the market, despite all of this positivity with all these returnees coming back for San Francisco. And so I think that's pretty telling as well, that there hasn't been that bite yet on 6.5 of how this is being viewed. I like the Seahawks here at 6.5 and the all-in effort that we're going to get from the defensive side for Seattle in this spot. Gerard says, be gentle. He was surprised with the Seahawks pick. I'm with you. I get that for sure. Released our leading tackler. I honestly, something that drastic and something that a little bit out of the blue, big signal to that locker room for what is going on. I'm pretty confident we see that reflected on the field in this matchup. Atlanta on the road at the Denver Broncos. Broncos a 2-point favorite. Significant movement on this one with a total in this game. It is not 46. That is a wrong banner. The total in this game is, in fact, 44. Hope nobody's heart skipped a beat on that one if you're looking to bet the over, as I know certainly folks out there with a lot of influence are. At 2, a smaller play on Denver for me. Number has moved quite a bit. When I look at this matchup, the Atlanta Falcons last week with Kirk Cousins faced a Saints defense, doesn't generate a whole lot of pressure. Kirk Cousins over the course of the season has had some pretty significant splits when pressured versus not. This is a game where he is going on the road, out of conference, to play this Broncos defense that blitzes a ton and has been quite effective at generating pressure. And so I do think that is a big impact on Kirk and this Falcons passing offense in this game that is going to slow down some of the Falcons' offensive output that we have seen in recent weeks. On the other side of the football, it's the opposite side of the story. When we're thinking about what the Denver Broncos want to do on offense and what Sean Payton wants to see, it's the offensive line dominate, and it's the run game leading the way, and it's setting up easier throws for Bo Nix. The Atlanta Falcons generate pressure on nobody. Last week, they didn't get to Derek Carr once. I've referenced podcasts that I respect hinting at the Falcons pass rush as a negative pass rush. They don't generate pressure. They can't manufacture pressure. They don't blitz. This is a game where Denver wins up front. The O-line is going to win. The run game is going to have success. And Bo Nix, kept clean, is going to be able to operate. We saw Cortland Sutton have a great game against the Chiefs, against McDuffie. It was McDuffie's worst game in coverage of the entire season. And it's a Broncos defense as generally overrated as I think that this team might be. When I just look at this kind of flow of schedule, last 2 weeks, road games against Baltimore and Kansas City. They're stepping up in class. I don't love them in those games. It was impressive what they did against Kansas City, but we saw the offense fall off, 4.7 yards per play in each of those games. But if we go back to the couple weeks prior against a Chargers defense that is in their weight class, if you will, it was 6 yards per play. Against the Saints defense that's certainly in their weight class, and you can compare them to the Falcons defense, it was, again, a big output, 6.4 yards per play. They had a 5.5 yards per play output against the Panthers, the game that they were just dominant up front and could take the foot off the gas late. And so The offense was trending up at a decent rate against some weaker opponents. They step up in class. It comes down. Now they're going back down and stepping back down in class. They're going back home where they've only played once in the last month and a half. And I think this is a spot where, again, we see that O-line win up front. We see the run game dominate, and we see Cousins and this Falcons offense struggle under pressure in this spot. Before we get to the big game, we'll get on a couple more questions in this one. Last week was such a gut punch for Denver. Tough to take them here. I can see that making sense, like sentiment-wise. Jets, Pete, I know what you're getting at from that. I tend to look at perhaps taking a bit more positive out of that with the fact that they were contending and competing with the Chiefs, I think was a standout. And so that, to me, kind of gave me a little more optimism for what we could see in this game, more so than the negative. But I see your point for sure. Ostrich, is the east-west travel aspect also a potential factor in this matchup as well? It's been shown that has a little bit more of an impact historically. It's like marginal than the west-east, which has been priced in pretty well so far. But again, this is not a late game where typically you see that as you're getting into some of the East Coast teams being at 11, 12, 1 a.m. local time for how the game is finishing. I don't think you see the time impact. Playing outdoors at Mile High, that is typically an early season advantage in terms of the conditioning and what comes from that. As you get late season, that impact tends to waver off. I think if anything, you're just looking at the Broncos' home field perhaps being a touch undervalued, just first of all, because they haven't played there in a long time, but second, because they haven't played a meaningful game there in a long time either. And so perhaps you get a bigger showing from Denver than typical. And the Broncos certainly in line in the playoff picture at the moment. So it's like there's no lack of meaning for this for a November game as well. So I think that's maybe more impactful in this if you're looking at that specifically than any of the travel. Dirty Reg says Denver for me. I'm with you. RW Forrest says great info as always. Keep it coming, Adam. I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate everybody tuning in. 350 folks here on the live stream. If you're enjoying it, the subscribe button is down below. Would love it if you hit the subscribe button. Like button is also there as well, the thumbs up. So if you have a second right now as you're listening, maybe you've even got the phone down on the desk and you're working, just pick the phone up for a second if you don't mind. Hit either the like button or the subscribe button. Would love to have you here on the channel. And if you're enjoying the content, you get something to listen that maybe makes you think about how you're betting or helps you get to a decision. Would love it if you show some support for the channel and hit that subscribe button as well. KC on the road at the Buffalo Bills. Bills, 2.5-point favorites. Total in this game is indeed 46. I duplicated the 46 from last banner to this one. I like the Chiefs here, getting 2.5 points. Injuries for the Bills. Keon Coleman will miss. Dalton Kincaid, that's the big story in this matchup. We suspect he has a better chance of missing than not in this game. And this is now something that you're starting to see confirmations of. He is not practicing today. There is a Bills injury account, which is Banged Up Bills, that is very good at internal reporting. And they labeled it as not looking good for Sunday. Lots of Twitter doctors expected this to be a 1 to 3 week absence. The Bills also have the bye on deck. You consider Kincaid's importance to this offense, maybe something that they are inclined to rest him slightly if this injury is in fact a sprain that has some severity, which could turn into a longer-term injury if there is a stability issue with it. And so without Coleman, possibly without Kincaid, it's a Bills offense that I think Chiefs defensively match up well against, because the big issue for Kansas City has been defending those tight end passes over the middle of the field. Knox as a fill-in could have an impact. We just haven't seen him be as dominant as he was in years past in this version of the Bills offense. And so I do think that is a positive in a big way for the Chiefs defense if this is in fact a game where Kincaid does miss. The difference for this Chiefs defense in this matchup specifically compared to other years is that the Chiefs have been so much better against the run this season than they have in prior years, where the Bills had a bit of an out in those games. This is a game where I think the Chiefs defensively up front against the run look as good, if not better, than they have in any of those games as well. They've just been so committed to stopping the run And that's a big advantage for how the Bills have been operating in some of these key high leverage games where they're going to heavier personnel, where they're attacking the spine of opposing defenses. It's going to be tough to do against this version of the Chiefs defense. So I think there's a lot of positives here for the Chiefs defense in this matchup. On the other side of the football, the Chiefs offense, we know, like, there's a lot of numbers that you can look at if you're handicapping this game, and you can point to the Chiefs being outgained in 5 of their losses. You can point to the Chiefs' lack of explosiveness and some of the issues that they have faced in terms of being able to generate bigger plays down the field. You look at some of the yards per play numbers for Kansas City, and it's been very disappointing, and it's been very underwhelming, and it's kind of just a stretch now. 4.8, 4.9, 4.3, 4.6 yards per play on offense. You think about the average right now in the league, it's 5.4. It's just the Chiefs underperforming league average from a per play perspective for more than a month now. And that's been a big difference. But in this spot, as you're getting to it, and it's going to sound square and it's going to sound narrative-y, it just reminds me of the San Francisco game, where all of these same arguments were true. And there was the revenge, and there was the Chiefs' underperformance, and there was the bounce back spot and getting it right. And there were all the matchup advantages that could be pointed out. And the number opened with the 49ers as a 1-point favorite. It got out to 2.5. And it's just a big game where Mahomes and Reed step up, and you get the offensive effort to manufacture points that's enough, and the Chiefs win the game on the heels of their defense. This game just reflects so much of what we saw in that Niners game, and I think it plays out in the same way. I really don't have a lot more to it than that. I think that's how I look at it. And so I might get criticized for that in the comments. I might get jabs thrown at me, but it's just as simple as that for me. What I will say is something to monitor is Morris at left tackle, banged up. We saw Kingsley step in. He has struggled all season long. There are speculations that Donovan Smith is ready to be signed. And so if we see the injury report trend that way, it would be likely that the Chiefs add Smith to shore things up at left tackle. That would be a big addition, certainly against the Denver Broncos after the injury. We saw some struggles with that. And anytime that there's been a switch at the position this season, that's been a big problem. If you get Smith added in there, that could be potentially a boost to the Chiefs' offensive line. So, again, criticize me for being square on this one. It is what it is. I like the Chiefs here at 2.5. Cincinnati on the road at the LA Chargers. We released over 46.5, like the Bengals in this game as well, +1. This is a big adjustment up for the total. A lot of folks will be watching this and say the Chargers games aren't getting into the 40s. They've played 2 overs, one against the Broncos, one last week against the Titans. Both of those required garbage time touchdowns in the final minute to go over the total. I've talked about Chargers overs a lot here on the live streams. It's been low 40s, high 30s. The Chargers pass rate over expectation is getting jacked up since the bye. Herbert is playing at a ridiculous level right now. This is a massive total for the Chargers in the Chargers game. It's still one I'm happy to go over in this spot. This is a Bengals team that is getting anyone and everyone over the total with how they are playing on both sides of the football. I don't think the Chargers are going to be an exception in that. You are going to see Herbert have another great game against this Bengals defense. I think it's inevitable. You are going to see Joe Burrow have a great game against this Chargers defense, especially if there is potentially a boost with T. Higgins coming back. This is a Sunday night football game with both teams. This is what we wait for Sunday night football games. This one's going to be wide open. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. When I get into kind of a handicapping angle for why I can justify the over and what I'm looking at, and more so why I can justify the Bengals here +1 and what I'm looking at, the Chargers offense has not been pushed, arguably all season, because you can point back to the Chiefs game in the game where they were pushed. That was a game where Herbert and the offense was totally different and banged up, and he was still dealing with the injury. I'm talking like post-bye since the Broncos game when we're thinking about the Chargers offense being pushed. Against the Broncos, they were up multiple scores. That was Bo Nix on the other side. That's not an offense that's going to push everything. Against Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, that was a game where the Chargers were down multiple weapons at wide receiver. That was the game where they relied on the tight ends. The Chargers had a great offensive output, whether it was the drop, touchback, other things that factored into that game, kept that score way lower. But that was a game, again, where that was a comfortable one-score game for the duration where the Chargers led for a bulk of the game. Against the Saints on the short week, again, backup quarterbacks that they were played. It was, again, a game where the Chargers were playing from a big lead and front running. Against the Browns, again, you have a QB change game. It's a spot where, again, the Chargers were out in front with broken coverages leading for the duration of the game. Again, last week against the Titans, it's another quarterback change game where Levis comes back and makes the start in LA, and another game where the Chargers are out to a big lead early in front running. And it's another game with some hidden points that were taken off the board as well. It's been the same game effectively played over and over for the Chargers, where they're front running and they don't need to be pressed and the offense isn't challenged. And still we're seeing that pass rate over expectation pushed. And so not only is this a serious step up for this defense in terms of opposing quarterback that they are facing, but it's also the first time that we could really see this offense pushed. It is Cincinnati with the season on the line. We see a big drop in terms of if they win north of 40% to make the playoffs. If they lose, it'll be under 15%. So it's similar to last year. If you remember a lot of the videos, we were pointing out overs in games where you have that desperation kicking in mid-November into mid-December with season on the line for how the AFC was last year. The Bengals fit that. They're not going out quietly in this game. They're going to go out with Burrow throwing the football, and that's a positive here for the over as well. So we see points, we see a Bengals win, and we see a very fun game on Sunday Night Football. Indianapolis on the road at the New York Jets. Jets 3.5-point favorites, total 44. 56 minutes, we'll take the first sip of coffee. Felt the voice starting to go there a little bit. I was thinking about it around the 25-minute mark. Slipped my mind. We talked downhill for the next 40, and here we are. Fun game. Rightfully flexed into the 1 p.m. slot to avoid some more Jets embarrassment. I say fun game because it's turned into kind of an intriguing handicap. Jeff Ulbrich this morning did a tackling presentation for the team at practice. They also held a full and extended padded pad practice. I butchered that tongue twister. A full and extended padded practice where they emphasized tackling and taking to the ground. They're doing the same thing tomorrow on Thursday. I'm laughing at how bad I butchered that. The point being, the Jets' defense against the Cardinals looked horrendous, as bad as it has looked all year. It's been a bad defense all year. But against the Cardinals, that was downright embarrassing. The level of effort suggested some quit. Like that, I think about that play from Sauce Gardner against Trey McBride at a key spot to get off the field, where McBride dragged him for 8 yards down the field. Embarrassing for the Jets. The reason I bring this up, beyond just joking wise, where everyone wants to take shots at the Jets, myself included now at this point, is typically when you see something like this, especially on November 13th, that represents a big effort boost for the team in that game. To go full padded practice Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with the emphasis on tackling, like that's something from a subjective handicapping perspective that I would really want to bet into. Now, in this spot against the Colts, you kind of see some more reason to do that, because the Colts this morning announced, just 2 days after reaffirming that Joe Flacco would start for the duration of the season, that Anthony Richardson is back starting under center for the Colts. And so I think about these two locker rooms. On one hand, you have the Jets, yes, down and out, embarrassed. I get it. I agree with it. It's a big negative. But here they go to the full padded practice, boosting things up, going for more effort, trying to fix the big issue that they have had. If you get that boost from the defense, that's a big positive. What's going on behind the scenes in Indy? You have a team that effectively wanted, based on how it was reported, Anthony Richardson benched. You had a coaching staff come out against a lot of ridicule and stand by the decision to bench Anthony Richardson and start Joe Flacco, you produce two of the worst offensive games that have happened in the Steichen tenure and two games at a lower EPA per play than what you were getting from Richardson. You come out on Monday morning this week and say Flacco's our guy, he's starting. We get to Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific. Now, Anthony Richardson's going to start, not just for this game, for the rest of the season. And so I can't help but compare the contrasting environments here that must exist, where one team is going back to the guy they didn't want and benched and took all the criticism in the world for. Now you have a team that's taking all the criticism in the world on a weekly basis, but you have what should be an elevated defensive effort from the tackling spot, which has been the biggest liability all season, which in theory should elevate the rating of the Jets. And during the early portion of this market, Sunday night, Monday, and into Tuesday, the Jets were being bet. And I couldn't quite understand why. Perhaps this is information that had been figured out elsewhere in the market, because it certainly makes sense from a subjective handicapping perspective to bet the Jets here -3.5. And so for the sake of being square, I'll get criticized for this one too, as I will for the Chiefs. I want to bet into this subjective handicapping side of things in this matchup, as detrimental as that might be. And I would take the Jets here -3.5. And so that's how I look at it. That's how I look at the game. I like this spot. So that's what I would do. Devin says, do you see the Jets as over or underrated at 13th in market ratings? I see them properly rated, but more over than under. Birdie says, great info. There was some smash a likes button. Gary, I am from northern Saskatchewan, Canada. That's a long way from Queens. Roger Long says Richardson is QB1 now again. Points to the coaching mismatch. Daniel says, Colts did the right thing for the future starting AR. Not sure if he's still better in the moment. Steichen said his preparation has been better the last 2 weeks, why he was reinstated. Look, I agree that starting Richardson is the right thing to do. I'm with you on that. But I don't know how a team handles that internally with how things have been going. So I think I think they should have never benched him to begin with. I think the reversal here could lead to negatives internally. Houston -7.5, total 42.5 on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. There's really not a whole lot that needs to be said here. It's another Cooper Rush game for the Dallas Cowboys. He was announced as the starter yesterday. There was initially a chance that we might see some Trey Lance. That is not to be the case. I saw the Dallas Cowboys in a respected set of power ratings ranked 32nd below the Carolina Panthers, and I have a hard time disagreeing with that. The Texans will have Nico Collins back on the field in this game. He is going to be a full participant. It is confirmed this time, a full participant all week long in practice. You guys saw what this Texans defense did against a very, very good Detroit Lions offense. What is the expectation in this spot for the Dallas Cowboys with Cooper Rush? I can't think it is very high. Now, at this price point at 7.5, not only has there been an adjustment down on the Dallas Cowboys, but you think about the Eagles last week closed 7. The Eagles team has been dominant for weeks. The Houston Texans have been anything but for the last 5 weeks. And really, it's been an offense that has been struggling in a pretty big way. Nico Collins coming back could absolutely fix that. He was the league's leading wide receiver when he went down. So you're expecting a bump for Houston, but we're now pricing Houston at a higher price point relative to where this closed last week than what the Eagles were. And given the Houston Texans struggles, that's a bit of a reach. And even against Detroit, they put up 3.8 yards per play on offense. Against the Jets, 4.3 yards per play. Against the Packers a couple weeks prior, 3.3 yards per play. I mean, it has been bad for this Houston Texans offense. And now they're laying 7.5 on the road. I get there's a lot of negatives here with the Cowboys. Not necessarily something I'm comfortable backing. I do not have a play on this game. But if you're looking at this and saying it's an easy slam dunk for Houston, That's something to keep in mind when you're looking at this from a price perspective. Good card, week 11. That wraps everything up for us. There's a question about what is hanging from my collar. It is, in fact, a microphone. And I'm intrigued. There's been 2 comments about how it visually looks worse. I still have the other mic that is out there, but what I found was that one was quite obstructive. And so as I learned more about presentation skills and doing things on camera, the lav mic is the preferred choice relative to the old mic stand. You guys let me know what you think about it. Something that was going on, the camera had a lot of blur. I am told that is called bokeh. You guys got me. I'm not an AV specialist, but I figured out a way to turn that off. It was kind of manufactured in there. And so I do think it looks more clear in this spot. We'll see. So last questions, guys. We'll go for a few more minutes if you have any questions specifically about the card. Nino says, Jets last year's Cleveland for Sharps, consistent loser. The Browns last year were last year's Jets, where they were consistent losers, but they were getting bet every week as bad as it was. So it's like the internal cycle of the AFC, where one year it's the Jets, the next year it's the Browns, the next year it's the Jets, next year it'll be the Browns, and it'll just keep cycling through. RJ says, throw that thing in a lanyard. I don't know about that. It has to be like in some reference to get the Omni mic to get you. Ryan Locke says, I'm shocked this game moved off of -3 in favor of the Jets based on how they have played this year. There's a lot of advanced stats that have the Jets right around the league average team on both offense and defense. And so the media perception of them and the on-field perception are quite different. Now, the Arizona Cardinals game was an embarrassment, so I get it. Joshua says mid-season award predictions. Good question. We are sweating out I say we for anybody who watched the preseason videos. I can't remember who had the bet. There is somebody watching this in the chat. I'm sorry for forgetting who it was. One of my bold preseason predictions was that the Arizona Cardinals score 500 points. And there's somebody in the channel that found Arizona over 450 points, and they got it at like 9-1. And so I can't remember who it was. I wish I remember the handle. They're sweating that out every single week. And I think about them every time I'm looking at the scoreboard because they're sweating out that Cardinals bet, cheering for effectively 27.5 points every single week. And I always think about it every single week when I'm looking at that. I'm just pulling up the awards market to show, because I was going to say something else that we're sweating from that beginning of the season award show was the Josh Allen MVP, which has a big game on deck for that. So offensive, I see Allen is 4-1, Lamar's +110 in MVP. So still looking at Allen MVP, offensive player of the year. That is a runaway for Derrick Henry. The way that he is playing and contributing, that's always effectively the best non-quarterback, and he certainly has been that. Offensive rookie of the year, that's easy. Jaden Daniels. I would be shocked if anything changes in that. Defensive player of the year, TJ Watt, the overwhelming favorite. Again, that one's kind of a runaway, as is Jared Verse for the defensive rookie of the year. Comeback player of the year. So we, from that same show, have Kyler Murray at 50-1. He is down to 9-1 as the third favorite. If things continue to trend the way it was with the new wording of the award, I really think Murray is in line for that, because he did miss time last year to injury. He is coming back off the injury. It wasn't the end of season, finish the season with the injury like Cousins or Burrow. Be curious to see how that plays. I do really think Murray is still live for that. Coach of the year, I don't agree with Dan Quinn being the front runner for that. The Commanders are going to get the surprise bump for that if they make the playoffs and hold on and they get it, and he's going to be kind of a shoo-in for that. I think if it comes down to it, and both the Chargers and the Commanders make the playoffs, we see Harbaugh win that award over Dan Quinn. That's just my take on it. And so in terms of what we're looking at, I think that stands out. And I don't necessarily agree with Harbaugh being priced higher or longer odds than what we're seeing from Dan Quinn in that. I don't think I missed any from that. Did I miss any? I think I got them all. So MVP, Allen, obviously a big week for that. Offensive Player of the Year, Henry. Rookie of the Year, Daniels. Defensive Player of the Year, Watt. Defensive Rookie, Verse. Comeback Player of the Year, Murray. Coach of the Year, Harbaugh, would be the preseason predictions on that. Fitty got the joke. Run away. It wasn't intentional. But yes, that was it. The comment section hates the Jets. Everybody hates the Jets. I think to an extent I'm starting to hate them a little bit. Not only does everybody hate them because of the political reasons and how it was built up, but you now have like you have like the Giants boat picture with Rodgers and Adams from the McAfee show and that whole saga. You had the coach firing early in the season. You have Rodgers 10 times a game with his facial expressions. They're the most dislikable team that there is, I think, in the NFL. So, I mean, everybody hates them, rightfully so. Harbaugh isn't even going to win his division. Neither is Quinn. So that's not necessarily a prerequisite to win the award. It's more the improvement year over year. And both of those stand out. I see the Harbaugh coaching experience so far this year being more impactful than the Quinn coaching experience. Quinn is a defensive coach. Commanders' defense has struggled all season. Harbaugh comes in, and we're seeing Herbert do everything with no skill position guys anywhere. So I think Harbaugh should do it. They were expected to make the playoffs. They were, again, the award is the improvement year over year. And I don't think they were favored to make the playoffs. I think they were a small dog. Neither team is going to win the division. The Chargers will not win the division. The Commanders will not win the division. And so I don't think the division win is tied to that coach of the year. That's just my take on it. I think we agree. We disagree on that one. That's okay. Joshua Bennett says Chiefs go 16-1, Steelers go 12-5. Who wins coach of the year, Reed or Tomlin? It depends if we see the Chargers or Commanders make the playoffs and finish well. I don't think either of those performances would get the bump over those other two if that's how it finishes. But I don't think the Steelers finish 12-5. We'll do two more questions before we wrap up. If you guys have anything before we go, anything you want to know about this week or beyond, happy to answer if you put it in the chat, and we will wrap up. Love doing the Q&A stuff. I've been doing a lot of it over on TikTok as well, just impromptu live streams over a coffee. And so if you guys want to follow up with those two, as always, we'll have the pinned comment here below the YouTube video going for the course of the week with anything updated, anything that stands out, anything that I add to the card as well. No, there were definitely a few games so far that we were looking at here from the show. Cleveland was one. Baltimore was another. Detroit was another, albeit lesser so at 14. Tennessee at 6. Seattle at 6.5. Denver at 2. Chiefs at 2.5. Chargers, Bengals over 47. Were all ones that stood out to you. Joe is asking about look-aheads for next week. Good question, Joe. I honestly haven't had a lot of time to look at it. I could pull it up quickly here on the live stream, but that would just be kind of a knee-jerk reaction for what I'd be looking at. And so that would maybe be a better question that I can get to on a later live stream as well over on TikTok, either later today or tomorrow. So that's not so I'm not going to just throw out a flyer for you right now. I'll take a look at that and let you know on those live streams. Also, just want to say appreciate everybody who submitted their answer to the question that I sent out yesterday on Twitter. That was great to hear. Got a few hundred replies to that. Was really something that I put out there and put some ad spend behind just as a content creation idea, just understanding topics people want to hear more about. So that was very helpful for anybody who took the time to get their answers submitted into that. It was very, very helpful with a lot of great ideas as well. Preston asks, what are your media appearances for the rest of the week? No more planned. I've got the Sam P video at 11. That'll be out on Twitter. Back to 500, unfortunately, with the loss last week in those video series. VSiN was done yesterday. That's going to be Tuesday moving forward. Nothing planned for Thursday, nothing planned for Friday. We'll be doing the daily podcast at 5 and 2. Other than that, everything now is condensed between Monday and Wednesday at about 11:15 a.m. in the morning. Everything is done. Certainly going to be big changes for some media next year as we kind of get towards the end of this. I certainly have a lot of different thoughts about media and how that's being presented and kind of cannibalizing itself in a way. And so there'll be some changes next year that everyone will definitely be updated on for just the general schedule of how some of these shows are being done and what times they're going out. But for this week and the rest of the season, it's podcast every morning, Wednesday live stream, impromptu TikTok streams, and then VSiN is Tuesday at 1:30 Pacific, and then the Sam P video is Wednesday at 11. Last question we'll wrap up on. If you had all the scores to one NFL week before the games, how would you attack it? I don't even know what you're trying to ask in this. Like, I get it, and it's interesting, and I'm trying to figure out what you're asking and how to do it. So I guess the answer would be, how would you make the most money? The simple answer is, you're making me think on this one. I don't know. I would go to the group and say, what's the credit limit that we have? And we would just unload everything on all the scores and totals in a massive parlay, but then you wouldn't be collecting. So I think the natural thing to do would just be to play sides appropriately for an amount at stable outs that you know that you could collect, rather than going for the massive exact outcome parlays that you would never get paid on and you would never be able to collect. And so that's how I think I would attack that. But that's a question that I've never ever thought about. But that's how I would do. I mean, the action you could get down would be almost unlimited. The question becomes, how much of that action would you actually be able to collect? So it would certainly need to be spread around at a lot of different places. You could potentially, obviously knowing the scores, you wouldn't have, the lines wouldn't know the scores, so you would have the advantage from that. So you would have potential for a lot of middles if you could anticipate some of the movement. But the simple answer is, get very strategic in how it's spread out and play a lot of sides and totals that you were confident that you could get paid out on. I think that would be it. Because if you're going for those big exact score parlays and you're trying to run up a lot of exact stuff, the collection on that is going to be a nightmare. And so there is an extent to how much there's almost no extent to what you could get down, but there is an extent to what you could get down that you could get collected upon. So that's how I would do it. Good question. Fun one to end. Roger Long says, thanks for working hard at it, young man. You're a smart guy. Not so young anymore. The years are piling up in a hurry. All right. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. As always, appreciate all the support for the channel. If you've enjoyed the live stream, the subscribe's down below, as is the thumbs up. Hit those before you go on your way out. Let's hope for a good week 11 ahead. And we'll hope to see each and every one of you on the podcast every morning, the rest of the week, tomorrow and Friday. Thanks again for stopping by. Keep an eye on the pinned comment as the week goes on. We'll chat to you on the next show.